Many of us have had experiences that taught us it is dangerous to love or value ourselves. Therefore, we hold unconscious beliefs that self-kindness will lead to harm. In other words, we are afraid to love ourselves without even knowing why. If you are someone who struggles with self-compassion, searching your heart for these deeper beliefs or fears may be an essential first step. In the previous video, I went over the 6 common misconceptions or fears around self-compassion. Things like, if I give myself compassion, I will be lazy, or selfish, or self-indulgent. All these concerns have been addressed in the research, and the truth is there are no downsides to self-compassion. In fact, there are only a huge array of positives. People higher on self-compassion are lower on anxiety, depression, and stress. They also have more happiness, life satisfaction, gratitude, and optimism. That being said, even if you watched the last video and were really on board with the idea of self-compassion and decided to do a self-compassion practice every day, there's a chance you would head up against a wall. Why? Because even deeper than our conscious fears around loving ourselves are our unconscious ones. These are ones that would be impossible to research because they're too unique to our own lived experience. Like, if I love myself, my narcissistic father will be threatened and find some way to put me in my place. Or if I seem confident, then my sister, who is always struggling, will feel inferior and will start decompensating, and my whole family will be stressed out. See how unique this can be to our own personal experience and how highly specific? Because while we do pick up on cultural messages on how we should treat ourselves, most powerfully our brain learns what to do and not to do based on what was safe for us to do or not do when we were young. Sometimes that means physically safe, if we came from an abusive household or experienced danger because of our race, such that we had to adapt and act in certain ways to physically protect ourselves. But often we're talking about emotional dangers. But in either case, if we learn that feeling something or doing something will lead to a bad outcome, our brain will code that thing as a threat, even if it is something innocuous or even positive, like self-compassion or self-love. But why would self-love ever have a negative outcome? Let's discuss that. What we will explore are the 2 main types of fears that we develop and why, and I would camp those into either interpersonal fears or existential fears around self-love. Let me address the interpersonal fears first. By interpersonal fears, I mean that I learned I will be rejected or abused or punished for valuing myself. Let me use one of my dearest clients as an example because he has about the most intense shame I've ever seen. We've recently begun exploring how valuing himself was super unsafe in his family of origin. Why? Because his mother, probably because of her own deep shame, had to be better than everyone and have all the goodness herself and put everyone else beneath her. So she would punish my client for showing any kind of self-love. If he ever got accolades from a teacher or school or won an award, she would tell him, "Don't get too big for your britches." Now that's a fairly overt example where the parent is literally saying, don't value yourself. But often there are more implicit or subtle situations that can lead us to fear self-love as well. Like one of my friends was exploring with me how when she was young, her family was struggling with some medical and financial difficulties, and her parents were clearly very stressed. Plus, her brother also struggled emotionally, so they were dealing with that as well. So when my friend, who was actually really bright and was doing pretty well, when she succeeded at something, it felt cruel to show that to anyone or to feel good about it because her other family members were not doing so well. So in solidarity with them, she had to avoid feeling healthy pride or mastery. And interestingly enough, that was not the only learning that impacted her self-esteem. The other had to do with the fact that her parents only knew how to give love through helping or protecting or sort of rescuing another person in need. So when she was 3 years old and saying things like, "I want to do it by myself," she would notice their disappointment, like they didn't know how to be connected without being the helper. Even today, they're always asking, do you need money or how can we help you? It's almost like they don't know how to love her in her independence and success. And in our conversation, she realized how guilty she felt whenever her independence made her parents feel unneeded and therefore disconnected. She had unconsciously learned, my pride, my confidence will hurt others. See how specific that fear is to her situation with a very clear emotional learning. I mean, for many years, she wasn't conscious of why she was uncomfortable with pride, but once she was able to deeply reflect, it makes perfect sense. That being said, while these fears are so unique to our own learning, there are some common themes. Like if I raise my head up, I will target further abuse. Or if I stop making myself the problem, then I will have to face that my parents were the problem. Okay, I actually wanted to take that last sentence and just stretch it out a bit because it is a very powerful and common theme. And while it is learned interpersonally, it's more what I would think of as an existential fear. What does that mean? That means that my brain says, I cannot deal with seeing some part of reality. If I allow X, Y, and Z to be real, it will be too destabilizing for me. And what is the most painful thing for a child to see when they are young? That my parents don't know what they're doing. That's a terrifying thought because children are completely reliant on their parents to protect them. So if they really allow themselves to see the obvious, which is that mom and dad are not doing a good job of taking care of the family, it can create a huge amount of fear and inner instability. So what will kids often do instead? Blame themselves. They will develop a sense that they are the problem, not the parent. It doesn't matter if it isn't true. The brain doesn't care so much about truth. It cares more about what will help us survive. And however horrible it is to have shame and to blame myself, if it allows me to feel a little safer because I've preserved my image of mom and dad, then I'll take it. And honestly, that probably is better than the alternative. Children need to feel at least a modicum of stability, even if it's based on something very negative, like thinking poorly of oneself. That's still better than the sense of chaos and fear that would come of thinking poorly of mom and dad. When children blame themselves, often they do so to create a little island of certainty, perhaps even gain a slight sense of control, without which it would be difficult to face life. Okay, so obviously these learnings and fears can go pretty deep. And because of the way they are encoded in the brain, they are generally not conscious. That being said, it is possible and important to make them conscious. That is what therapy is all about. At least the deeper kinds of therapy, the ones that Bruce Ecker calls non-counteractive. In non-counteractive approaches, also called experiential approaches, instead of just telling our brain the way it is, counteracting our brain, we slow down and understand its lived reality and what it has learned to expect, whether that's rational or not. Until we address those deeper fears, an approach like CBT, which tells us to override them, I don't think will really work for us, at least not in relation to something as deep as undoing shame. However, there are many forms of therapy and even some self-help that can help us transform the way we treat ourselves through working with the parts of us that believe it is unsafe to feel self-love. This work needs to be experiential because our brain only believes what it experiences, right? So if you are someone wanting to develop self-compassion, what advice would I give? Well, one place to start is by going to Kristen Neff's website and signing up for one of her courses on self-compassion. That way you can learn some self-compassion practices and you can try out using them in your daily life. I think a practice is the first place to start because often we simply have difficulty with something because we haven't learned it or practiced it enough yet. So an obvious first step is to learn the steps of self-compassion, try doing them, and see if your brain will let you, even if it's awkward at first. However, it is possible that you will start engaging in a self-compassion mindfulness practice and, for the reasons we just explored, you will find some part of your mind resisting or even feeling disturbed by it. And that resistance is based on fear. Like your mind saying, "What are you doing to me here? I learned it's unsafe to care about myself, so don't push us towards self-care. That feels dangerous." So that's where deeper therapy might be necessary. Remember that client I was mentioning whose mother told him, "Don't get too big for your britches." Just this week, we had a breakthrough which gave him a lot of relief from his shame. And I got his permission to describe our work here because I think it's a great example of the type of inner work we can do to relieve unconscious fears around self-love. So for this client, how he usually experiences his shame is as this very cruel inner bully that tells him he's worthless. Then in response, he feels small and scared and simply screams back, "Leave me alone." The shift occurred when he understood that while he is scared of his inner bully, that shaming voice itself is simply like a young, frightened part of him. Realizing that his inner bully must be afraid of something or else I wouldn't feel so compelled to bully and shame him, he was able to bring on a little curiosity and get a little observing distance. I had him step back both from the bully and from the little hurt boy inside screaming, "Leave me alone." And that way he could access his inner adult that wanted to show up for his own mind, even for his scary, shaming voice, and offer support. From that vantage point, he could ask his inner bully, "What are you afraid would happen if you stopped shaming me?" Slowly, the answer emerged. "It is dangerous to feel good about myself, because doing so means disagreeing with Mom. Mom thinks I'm bad, and I have to agree with her. If I disagree with Mom, she'll hurt me. She will send me to boarding school like she threatens. Unless I agree that she's right and I'm bad, the little love I have from her will evaporate and the whole family will send me out into the cold." These were the types of words that began to emerge. Now, for my client, understanding the fears held by his inner bully was a pivotal point. Why? Because the moment he could feel the shaming part's fear, he could also feel compassion for it. He could really get how his inner critic and shaming voice, the one he'd always been afraid of, was really just a frightened child itself. And he was able to take it by the hand. In fact, he pictured in one hand taking the shaming voice and the other hand taking the part that had been shamed. And he was feeling so loving and protective of both of them. And he imagined taking them by the hand to a warm cabin in the woods where only safe and loving people were around. That simple but deep process took the wind out of the sails of his shame, because now the part of him that was scared of losing Mom's love could realize that he's safe now. He no longer needed to worry about pleasing Mom or gaining her love, because now my client is able to feel love for himself. This love created the sense of security he needed to finally disagree with Mom and begin to accept his own value. So that example I just gave would be a good demonstration of how the fear of caring for ourselves might be worked through the lens of IFS, or internal family systems therapy. IFS is not the only therapy that works beautifully with shame. In fact, in my other videos, I talk about ADP and coherence therapy and how they can shift unconscious learnings as well. It was through coherence therapy that I learned about these deeper unconscious fears that can block our ability to value ourselves. But if you struggle with your relationship with yourself, I encourage you to watch the IFS video series I made, because it will give you some language and imagery to better understand and interface with your mind in general, and some tools you can use to address the unconscious fears that block self-compassion. So I will put a link up to that video as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, you can help me out by liking and subscribing. Or if you're a therapist who would like to train with me while earning CEUs, you can visit my website at toriolds.com.